CV, which includes spells at places such as Microsoft as well, where you worked on security architecture. So, Steve, thank you very much.
So I had somebody yesterday called it Trader's Day, not Independence Day. That was fun. Intel, I actually have a medium confidence Intel hit that somebody in my room used the clothes iron to make a bacon and cheese sandwich. I went to go use the thing and it was all crusty. All right, so as people are walking in here, one of the benefits of having a smaller room like this is that we can actually ask questions. And I'm going to say right up front, I will be horribly disappointed if I don't get interrupted repeatedly with big, ugly, hairy questions. This is way more fun if you guys ask questions. You know, I may not even have the answer, but somebody in the room has the answer, okay? So I'm not kidding. You interrupt me 20 times while I'm doing this one. That will make the presentation wildly more entertaining. The format of what I'm going to do here, I work for an amazing company. So if my CEO was standing up here, what we would be saying, what Kevin would be saying is, we respond to all the breaches that matter and we know more about the bad guys than anyone. And it's true, unquestionably true. If my CTO was up here, his name's Grady Summers, he would be talking about products and services. My version is not that. This is not a vendor presentation. What my version of this is how to get astounding results from the people you can actually hire, okay? So, our consulting arm is called Mandiant. They are the best post-breach recovery people on the planet, unquestionably. But if I was talking to you about techniques that would require a Mandiant person to do it, this would be a useless talk, right? I mean, if you need a $400 hour consultant to do the work, that's not going to help you, okay? So the format of what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the bloody war story that we find on these breaches responding to the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and the North Koreans. And how do you get that into a capability you could actually deal with the mortal human beings you can actually hire? Seem relatively useful? All right, so capabilities. Reality. Every single one of the examples that I give you here actually happened. They actually happened to normal companies. Most of them came off of either Intel reports that we deal with or the breaches that we've worked. A couple of them actually happened internally in my own group. On the bottom part here, intelligence and hunting, those terms are totally overused in the industry, completely. Everybody has a different definition of what they are, and I'm not going to try to sort that one out. Instead, I'm going to tell you what my definitions are here so you know what to expect. I actually was at a Gartner conference a year ago, and I listened to Verizon say they had the best intelligence in the world because they ran the backbones. No, that's not intelligence. That's net flow. It's good for context, but there's nothing actionable you're going to get out of backbone data. Okay, so when I'm talking intelligence, I'm talking like the Intel feeds, like the ones that we sell and stuff, but also what can you get from FS-ISAC data, from reading our M-Trends reports, the Verizon breach reports, all that kind of stuff. So anything where it's a chunk of information that you can take actions from. Okay, so it's a fairly broad definition. On the hunting side, there is a very solid case to be made for pure hypotheses-driven diamond model hunts, but that takes very senior people. I'm loosening up the definition here. In my case, what I'm talking about for this talk, hunting is anything where the value requires a human being to do it. Okay, so you'll get multiple examples in here where the actual technique, there is no technology on the planet that can tell you this is evil and this is not. You need a human mind, okay? And that's what we're going to get into here. So I hope that doesn't go too badly with other people's definitions of these. The most important part out here is maximizing what you have. Now, technically, all of my examples will come out of products that I use because I use every product that we sell. Theoretically, you could do this with somebody else's intelligence, sources, et cetera, et cetera. The good news is if you follow the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, you would be able to compare, for example, two different intelligence sources. How could you ever know which one's better than what? I believe that the answer is which ones give me more things to steer behavior and change the way my organization runs. Now, before I get into the details, I'm going to set a high bar for this. I'm going to say that I believe that at the end of this talk, every single one of you should be able to do something differently in your own current organization tomorrow. Seriously, that's a pretty high bar. Now, if I don't reach that, tell me afterwards, punch me in the nose, tell me what I did wrong, and I will find a way to answer that one. So I'll bring that back up at the end. Ultimately, my marketing people paid to have me here, they get exactly one slide out of me. like why should you be listening to me standing up there? FireEye as a company, our products are fantastic. They between the networking stuff, the endpoint products, there's an awful lot of capabilities in there that just don't exist in the world. Having said that, I don't actually think we market them very well. It's like I saw an internal number that was talking about our endpoint products. Something like 70% of what we're finding isn't found by any other engine in the world. And I'm like, why is that not on like billboards and airports and things? I mean, so I'm also a shareholder. I wish they did that one better. We talked, Mandy and already, the adversary intelligence, depending upon who you ask, our eyesight intel group is between number 7 and number 10 in the world compared to countries. So there are entire continents that cannot do what my intelligence group can do, which is amazing. I love working for a company like that, but the purpose of this talk is, how can you use that? How is that more than just, IOCs that you have in your SIM? The more important part, however, lower right-hand corner there, what do you all know? What is it that you have coming from the telemetry on your devices? What is it that you have for other intelligence sources? What are the incidents that you're working, and how can you learn from them, and how can you change, and change multiple times a day? The purpose of this is to be able to have a structure in order to be able to direct the way your staff and your organization does things differently day after day. So from the previous talks, I was talking about sort of incremental, slower over time kind of changes. I agree with that. However, you have to be making actual changes at a regular interval. And in my case, I believe that regular interval is multiple times a day. All right. I'm going to start with a board slide. So this is actually, the numbers are not my internal numbers, but I give this one to the audit committee of my board. Now, it's a little different in my company because I have highly technical execs. I really do. My CEO has worked more breaches than I have. That's impressive. The best part about this slide is that it's a simple way to get it across to non-technical people, and a lot of our board members are non-technical, but the capabilities behind it are fantastic. So you can get your technicians behind understanding what we're doing. The first one is, do you know how many people have actually attacked you? Known, you've gotten down to attribution, you've gotten that. I'll tell you right now, my internal number is 14. I know 14 individual attack groups that have come after us. Some of them are big, ugly ones. I've had APT-34, which is one of the Iranian groups, try to come in. I've also had some chumps. There's a guy named the Dark Overlord who steals information, tries to sell it back to you, and he took one of our intelligence documents that he stole from a customer of ours, broke into his email, and tried to sell us back something I'd already sold. Like, it didn't make any sense to me at all, right? But he counts. The middle one there, the watch list, is how many people are suspected to have attacked you. So in my world, when we release a new APT report for a group in Pakistan, for example, they go on the watch list. But in your guys' industries, it could be who else is coming after other airline industries, or who else have attacked your peers in other financial companies, right? This is fairly well known. You have a lot of ways to figure out who might be attacking you. The bottom part is where it gets into the technology. The TTPs and the malware that are being used by those top two groups, you have to treat them differently. You have to be able to know, if this piece of malware happens, I really have to pay attention, because in my case, that's something that the Iranians have used, right? Sounds like a simple capability. It's amazing how many people cannot do that, right? We all sort of live in a world where there's fire hoses of alerts aimed at your face, right? Well, okay, so you say, I'm going to look at critical only, and then you have too many of those. So you say, well, I'm going to look at only the important criticals. Well, how do you know what an important critical? Start there. Start right there. If any of those things happen, that's where your investigations have to start, no matter what, unquestionably. Some of those are more ugly than others, but I'll give examples of those farther down in. And I haven't had a question yet, so you're all on notice. He's got a question.
What does APT stand for?
Advanced Persistent Threat. Actually, I try to not do acronyms. That's a good question. In our world, we label the individual attack groups that come out as APT groups or FIN groups, for financial groups, financial actors. Generally, although it's not quite as simple anymore, it used to be that the financial actor groups were sort of Eastern European, right? APT number 1 was China. The company that I work for, we blew the lid. The APT-1 report blew the lid off of exposing that it was the Chinese breaking into all of the American companies doing this stuff. What's fun is that that report, my company releasing that report, there's a very straight line between that and President Obama sitting down with President Xi of China and agreeing to have the Chinese no longer steal tens of billions of dollars from the US economy. Like in commercial terms, that's a fantastic company to work for. So, all right, keep that in mind because that comes up a couple other times later. This is the most boring slide, however, it's also important. The basic structure of what I'm going to do is what do I want to do, how much do I care, what do I want to do about it, and where possible, how can I automate it, right? Simple concepts. On the red part there, though, the intelligence side of things, it's not only what are the intelligence sources you've paid for, but who in your organization is tasked with looking at it and coming up with the capabilities you're expecting to do it. Now, in my organization, I find that at Cisco Groups, it helps for me to frame things out of reality. I work with amazing people, however, I am not going to get a $400 an hour consultant to work a midnight queue on a ticket, right? I mean, it's just not happening. So all of the people on my staff are totally normal. I have 8 people on my security operations team. I have 1.5 people that do threat intelligence. I don't have massive amounts of resources. Everybody sort of assumes that I have like unlimited staff. No, we're all in security. Nobody gets as much staff as we want, right? I have one guy in Pune, India. His name is Bhumit, and he's amazing. I pay him $24,000 a year. That's who does my ingest. That's the person that pays attention to all these things. And an awful lot of these examples I'm going to tell you are out of that slice of a very cheap resource, okay? On the how much do I care, you have got to be able to triage these things. You cannot have every single thing that happens be top, oh my God, priority, okay? So in general, when we're doing these, whether it's reading the intelligence reports that come out, the Mandiant M-Trends report just came out about a month ago. You should all read it. There's interesting stuff in there. Somebody has to read through it, and usually, at least 90% of the time, the answer is do nothing. That's a completely valid thing. Do nothing. You'll read a new thing about some malware family, and you, in my case, you have Bhumit goes in and checks, do I have autonomously critical alerts for this malware family? If yes, stop. There's nothing to do at that point. But I have somebody checking. Like, I mean, that's important, right? The interesting part on those, using that example, is when you end up with, well, I don't have a detection yet, right? And I might have one in 2 or 3 days, and you go like, okay, is there something I have to do for the next 2 or 3 days to sort of cover myself until the signature updates or the whatever, right? On the what do we do about it, this is totally about steering behavior. If you're not changing the way your organization, your own staff, as well as the broader organization, you're not changing how they do things repeatedly, regularly, you're just the security guy in the back room that they mostly ignore, right? You have to have a presence out there. And I got one good example later on that gets into ways where even if it's not horribly security relevant, you can actually steer behavior. All right, first example, because it's simple and easy and everybody understands this one. The Intel CPU vulnerabilities. Question?
Well, good question. You talked about the chap in Pune. How does your responsibilities vary between internal, actually looking at FireEye security, versus chargeable utilized time with customers versus product, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm internal corporate security. I also have the GRC group, so I do all the audits and risk and compliance and stuff. The GDPR discussions, that's been a slice of fun for me. I also have physical security. The only part of the product security that I do is I oversee software security, but that's actually the staffing for that is inside the engineering org. So I keep the scorecard, but I don't run the program, right? And I run the responsible disclosure. So when if a researcher was to find something on our product, they send it in, my guys take that and triage it and get it to the right people. But mostly I'm internal. In fact, actually, I do this one mostly so I can talk to you all and get ideas from you. So I mean, this is not my day job. All right, the Intel CPU vulnerability. So Intel and AMD recently had the vulnerabilities that got into being able to get into user mode, et cetera. Everybody freaked out about this. This was the thing for the year. There's always 1 or 2 a year where the freak out meter goes to, and everybody goes like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? Right, well, it was interesting that when it got announced, Amazon had already patched all of AWS. So it obviously wasn't a huge, horrible problem. But in my world, there's no emotion to this. You have to figure out what it is, and I've got staff all the way around the world. So when I came in the following morning, I already had engineers that were doing a threat model to figure out, do I have compensating controls? What is it that we got? How much do I have to freak out? How do I not have to freak out, right? And this is a key criteria for the rest of this talk. Under the how much do I care, I have two criteria as to when do I decide I'm going to freak out. One of them is this being exploited by a known APT group, right? Are the Russians or the Iranians, are they actually using these exploits? Or has it been weaponized to the point where it's just going to spread everywhere, like think Zeus bots, right? Neither one of those happened. So there was an awful lot of media attention about this, but it was not at the level that it was, in our estimation, freakout mode, right? Everybody knows we're going to patch, right? Patching is going to happen. We all still have to do patching. There's some interesting models where I literally have had conversations internally where we're trying to get to a model where we never patch anything ever again. There's a book out there called The Phoenix Project. If you have not read it, get the audiobook, listen to it on your ride home. I'm not kidding. It'll change the way you look at IT. The idea is never patch, only roll forward. So just rebuild the environment every single time with what's most current. And be able to do that multiple times a day. That's how Google does it, Facebook does it, Netflix does it. Anyhow, so on the what do we do, in this case, it's not a question of am I going to patch or not. Everybody knows we're going to patch. The question is, am I going to do it in, oh my God, freakout mode, or am I going to do standard, normal, monthly patching? Or is the 30% CPU hit going to be so important that we say, okay, hold on, slow down. Like I have to find something else to do because we have to figure out how to not destroy the business in order to do the patching, right? So in simple terms, this is an example that most people can wrap their heads around. All the rest of the examples are way more fun than this. The next one. In the M-Trends report last year, we had, there was some information in there that got into, we found the Russians that had broken into several financial institutions and they got tired of having to re-steal the accounts. So they issued themselves new Duo two-factor auth tokens as the stolen users. And they went into Office 365 and they delegated the email. So like how would you know if you had a secretary that could read your email? Unless you go into Outlook and specifically crawl down through things, you're not going to find it, right? Well, in our world, I have to do something with this, and I would say all of you should do something with this one. So the first thing we did was we go back, I don't know, 2+ years and looked at every single delegation in the company, made sure they were all real. Well, in go-forward terms, when the Russians were doing this one, they didn't also go into Workday and enter an account into the HR system and give her a paycheck, and because that would have had financial things that would have found them. It didn't go into our Newton system and put her CV there and go to the help desk system and give her a laptop that checks in once a week. And all of those little artifacts, those can all be pulled automatically. We have an automation product that we use for this called FSO. So in my world, whenever there's a delegation that pops up out of the O365 logs, it doesn't actually go in front of an analyst yet. It goes and automatically grabs all those other pieces of data and populates it into the ticket, right? And I have my second shift network guys. The NOC is looking at these, not even my security people. And we were able to go, here's what good looks like. If it's good, ignore it. Don't even tell us. If it does not have all of these, engage the security team, right? Relatively simple thing, but think about how glorious it is that I have my second shift Bangalore NOC guys protecting me from the Russians. Even more interestingly, I can't actually sell the idea of safe, but I'm as safe from this attack as possible, right? Because there's basically no other way that I could add any more value to this. Sure, the Russians could come in and do all of that work, which means I'm no longer going to have this hunt be the way I would find them. But I don't have to worry about this anymore. I can actually stare my board of directors in the face and say, I don't have this problem, right? That we were talking about, like, how do you have a confidence level with your board? It's a slippery slope because you do end up with the board thinks that I have this level of confidence on every single item ever. It's not necessarily that true, but in engaging people and confidence and having the credibility. So if you have to be able to go back and say, okay, no, stop, don't do that other thing. Well, you can do that when you have capabilities like this, right? This is resonating, right? I don't have any questions yet, but I'm waiting. You guys are going to bring them. Next one. We worked a breach. Oh, question in the back.
Just to go back to what you were saying, you were talking about, you went back 2 years or so to check delegate access rights. How did you do that? It's actually a relatively simple query in Office 365 just to look up what are the delegations that exist. And that will show actual delegations that are done by admins as well as sort of the
all of them.
Individuals.
Yeah, all of them. The interesting thing operationally, when we get into this one, we've had several times in the last, I don't know, year or so, we've been doing this one, where the NOC has called security and said, hey, I don't have everything in here. Almost always, it was somebody was skipping some process. Like we had one admin that had been out on maternity leave when we did the first work, and when she came back in, all of a sudden there was a delegation that didn't show up before, right? Things like that you'll find. The good news is that in security terms, there's a huge amount of value to be the group that found something outside of process, right? So being able to go back to the people that said, hey, you didn't handle that one right, all of a sudden they're going to remember, and they're much more likely to do it correctly in the future. I've got an even better example of that one later on.
So how would you turn that into a business process? Because I can see the value in sort of doing that and then communicating with the end user on a regular basis to say, hey, just to let you know, these are your delegate rights, these are the people that have access to your email, your calendar, and you sort of move that into your joiners, movers, and leavers process. Because I'd imagine it's one of those things that
It is.
people are going to forget about.
Yeah, the other thing about this one though is it's relatively rare. Part of the reason why this ends up being so interesting is that you don't normally have very many delegations. They don't change very often. So it's something you can wrap your head around. The difference is that when the Russians are doing it, it's catastrophic. When your chief legal counsel, which was literally one of the people that was popped in one of these financial companies, chief legal counsel, the CEO, the CFO, several others, if their emails are getting out, that's game-changingly horrible, right? You shouldn't be changing who has delegation of your CEO's email, except for when they get a new secretary, right?
And do you apply the same sort of thoroughness to rules that people are setting up? So I've seen experiences where people, they were Google account users, and their account had been compromised through a phishing attack. And then the first thing that the hacker does is set up rules, so any response to this email going to deleted items, and then the hacker's quite happily sitting there working out of deleted items, replying to those people going, yeah, no, I meant to send it to you, please click on the link, whilst the legitimate owner is just carrying on quite happily, oblivious to the fact.
Yeah, you're helping make my point off of this. So like, for example, at the same time when they were doing the Duo tokens, okay, it's another one of those like, hey, is this something we should pay attention to, right? When the Russians were putting out the evil Duo, new Duo tech, how would you know the difference between a good one or a bad one, right? There's no technology in the planet that's going to tell you this delegation is fine and this one's evil, right? Same idea as what you're talking about, right? In our case, we put together a process on the Duo tokens, and it was pretty good. And then the new iPhone came out, and hundreds of users all got new Duo tokens in 2 days, right? Okay, great. Change the process, right? So at that point, you have to go like, the best part about this kind of thing is I need a senior like security nerd to sort it out once. I just need the junior guys to be able to execute them, right? So in that case, it was if the old Duo token and the new Duo token are on phones with the same number and that number matches Active Directory and that number matches Workday, that's as close to safe as I can get. And if those all lined up, then move on, right? That's not going to help if they break into the phone company and start cloning SIMs, right? But of the available information I have, I can limit that risk down to as much as I can. On the roles, that's one of those places where you should be able to build off of other intelligence sources. So for example, most of us in the room here are Microsoft Premier customers, right? Part of Premier, you do the AD wraps and the security wraps that they have. They have a tiered administration model, tier 0 for domain admin and enterprise admin, tier 1 for server admins, et cetera. Tier 2 is standard user space. You're going to have trouble getting into that point. Although in tier 2, you can get into say like, I'm going to look at my execs and my lawyers, right? Subsets of that. In my world, we also do it for like who has access to source code, those kinds of things. There's specific groups. Also in intelligence things, in my organization, like we have a group of people that they speak on. Are you literally telling me 10 minutes? Excellent. I'm going to have to hurry up. There's a bunch of those. All right. We worked a breach. Customer had a group doing shadow IT stuff. They were doing a proof of concept code on some sales things, right? I mean, this happens all the time everywhere. The problem was that the MongoDB they had running this proof of concept code got hit with a piece of malware that was doing crypto mining. So they called us to go like, all right, how horrible is this? Turns out that the malware itself was not that big a deal. It's fairly commodity malware. The bad guys had made millions actually, off of just stealing CPU cycles. The problem was that when we worked the breach, we found out that the same database server that was hosting now malware also had their Salesforce API keys in there because it's salespeople and they have to be able to get in there, right? Well, you go, how much do I care? Well, I don't really much care about standard commodity malware. I care a lot about whether or not my API keys are out there, right? So being able to get in there, what are you doing? Think about this for a second. You're now talking about a shadow IT. There's no control, there's no logging. You don't even know it exists until somebody freaks out. Connecting to a cloud service at Salesforce, you hope you have those logs, right? Welcome to the cloud world. This is what it's like now. I have actually literally had to work entire incidents where it was totally in consumer class like email systems, Gmail logs and Hotmail logs. The entire incident was done out having nothing to do with my infrastructure at all. In this case though, there's a really good case to be made for, I don't have to have perfect control over my API keys, but I have to have some control. So in my organization, this one that we do, it's a hunt, sort of a hunt, is limited down to 1 hour a week. So you can wrap your head around 1 hour a week. And in this case, what it is go grab the logs out of Salesforce that come into my Helix platform. It's, I think, SIM in the cloud. Question?
Yes, please. I think this is one of the most important questions in the recent times, especially when we're going to the modern application, cloud-based systems.
Mm-hmm.
Coming to the point, your point is maximize the current stuff. I disagree with the point, especially when we're going to the most cloud-based system where we need to maximize the stuff because everything is just happening on there, on the cloud provider infrastructure. We need a small system, small group, just take care of the virtual system. So who is responsible to provide security for cloud-based application? Is it the cloud provider or the service owner?
So I believe the answer is both. It sounds to me like you drank the Kool-Aid a little bit. They're responsible for having a hard platform, right? So if somebody was to actually like break into Salesforce and destroy their code or their servers, that's their responsibility. Your API keys are yours. Your passwords are yours. The code you wrote is yours. And they specifically in their contract say that's not up to them to deal with at all. In fact, actually, when you're dealing with Salesforce, if you ask for logs, it's insanely difficult to, out of their logs, be able to tell which user clicked on what page, and they charge you $500 per request just to give you the logs. It's insulting.
You can outsource people, policy, process, system, technology. You cannot outsource risk. That's probably one of the biggest problems you'll ever have sitting and talking to a board. You can't outsource your risk.
I've used that exact same line dozens of times.
Because right now we're building a utility banking platform entirely in AWS.
Yeah, exactly.
So you believe me, I spend a lot of time on this.
Yeah, because I'm dealing with AWS as well.
Yeah.
So usually they say this 50-50. But what happens if the problem comes in between?
Yeah, I don't actually believe it's 50-50. I think that you should rely on Amazon for the things that they have, because let's be really clear. If somebody figures out how to corrupt the core back end of AWS, there's going to be a class action lawsuit from hell, right? And you would join it, and your board would be fine with that one, and you don't worry about that one at some point. One of the fundamental tenets of security architecture when you're doing this, when you're doing threat models, there are things you can affect and there's things you cannot affect. So, for example, when I was at Microsoft, they do threat modeling, I believe, among the best in the world, right? What they had a problem when they were training developers how to do this one. They would start looking at like, what are the theoretical things you could try to break into the TCP protocol? Okay, no. Trust the TCP protocol, and besides, there's other people that have to do that one. You deal with the code you wrote, right? You can't affect what Amazon does. You can't. You can choose to buy it or not. That's it, right? I'm going to keep going because otherwise she's going to get pissy at my timing. All right, I'm going to use, I'll probably go a little quicker through this one. I'm going to use, this one has to do with vulnerability management and specifically how to use the intelligence on the exact same technology, 3 different vulnerabilities, all in Cisco ASA with totally different results based on what the intelligence was, okay? And by the way, we do this all the time. So when Microsoft Patch Tuesday comes out, boom, it comes back with this kind of information every single time, right? All right. First one, late 2016, shadow brokers came out with a dump of information that may or may not have come from one of our 3-letter agencies. We don't get into that. When that came out, though, Cisco goes, yes, it's a vulnerability. You know, we're going to have to fix it. They said it was a high. Everything that comes from Cisco is a high, right? So we put the network guys on notice. We're going to do this one. The next day, the intelligence that comes out says, hey, wait a minute. We found 2 APT groups that are using this vulnerability, exploiting this vulnerability. Okay. Totally different conversation. Completely different. It is no longer yet another high vulnerability from Cisco. Now it's an exploited, targeted vulnerability being exploited, okay? Very different. So at that point, it got real interesting because they still didn't have a patch available. So we did all the same paperwork. Everybody has the same change control and everything. And we're queuing it all up. The patch comes out. We get it rolled out. 2 days after the patch came out, the US CERT, the government agency that gets into computer response, they told all the government agencies, hey, this is really important. You need to patch this. I already had all of my ASAs patched in the entire company except for one, which had a change window the following Saturday, internal only, not on the internet. But the Intel had made it so that I could literally get in front of my CEO, because this was with nerd execs, they asked me things like this one, right? I'm like, oh yeah, no, this was all good, and I could show the timeline and that kind of stuff. The next one, a few months later, there's a group called Vault 7, which, by the way, there was an arrest made in this one a few weeks ago. We like it when the good guys win. They came out with another one, and Cisco was a little gun shy because they had mishandled the first one. So they're like, oh my God, this is critical. You have to patch this right now. And now I've got 5 minutes. This is no way this is happening. Intel guys go back in, and as soon as you actually look at the way the exploit works, it only was a problem if you're running Telnet. Architecturally, you should never be running Telnet. This is a complete non-issue, and I would actually say that you would be wasting effort now if you tried to take a patch cycle for this. So when we went back to our network group off of this one, we're saying, seriously, stand down, ignore this one, and I would even, we told them, don't do anything for this. Wait until you're going to touch it from some other reason, and then pull it in there, right? In credibility terms, if you're going to be able to have that conversation with your networking group, you have got to have times where the security people are saying, no, this one's not a problem, right? Third one, which was more recent, this is 2018. We don't get into the attribution off of this one. This one came out, and it was world-shatteringly horrible. This one was Shodan queries. If you know what Shodan is, Google search where you can look for it, right? A Shodan query would find you ASAs that were vulnerable to this. So it wasn't just, I can find an ASA. It literally told you where to aim your scripts to attack right here, okay? This was horrible. Now, in our world, since we work so many breaches, we've got a lot of friends and family, different companies. We were trying to get patches before they were publicly available. This was that important. The reason why I put this on here, though, this happened at the exact same time as those Cisco, the Intel CPU vulnerabilities. Nobody was asking about this one. Now, in board communications, I had to go, when I'm talking to my board, I'm like, here's how we're prepared for the Intel CPU stuff, different answer internally than on our appliances. Here's the thing you should have been worried about, but you didn't have to because we had it covered, right? This one, we actually had all of the ASAs patched within a few hours of the patch coming available, but how would you know to do that one, right? If you're not paying attention as it comes in and being able to refer it back into intelligence sources, and this has to be multiple times a day. This is a rigor with a very small amount of resources with a vastly disproportionate amount of benefit out of it. Next example, and I love this example. So this one actually, Chatham House rules, this one actually happened to us. We have a process that we do, it's time bound down to 2 hours a week. Same guy out of India, so 2 hours of $24,000 a year. This is borderline free. Where we go into all of the blocked phishing mails that are true positive. So nobody does anything with blocked phishing mails, right? This is seriously a zero value thing. We go back in there and we say, how many phishing campaigns are hitting us per month? We average between 40 and 90 campaigns a month, right? Which very closely correlates to how much spam is there on the internet that month. In general, it's just crap. It's the same Nigerian phishing scam crap, right? We go in and 2 weeks later, every 2 weeks, we go in and we check against the intel and say, are any of these after the fact attributable to APT groups? And hundreds of times in a row, the answer is no. The answer is it's just normal, boring stuff. We got a hit last March that got back to, at the time it was UNC 676, the name of the group. Now they're APT 34. It's one of the groups out of Iran. And that changes things dramatically. Now remember, this was a phishing mail that was blocked, right? So they didn't actually get to do anything. But now we're very clear that they're targeting us. And that, by the way, goes on that top blue bar with the board slide, right? Well, what do you do with that? You go right back into the intel and you say, okay, what else is that APT34 does? Well, you do a bunch of credential harvesting and Active Directory brute forces and things like this. So you go in and it goes into the same process and you say, now I'm going to look differently at other boring events like failed login attempts and account lockouts. And I predicted the Iranians coming by 3 weeks. How many times do you ever in security get to say that because of what we did operationally, boring, cheap operationally, we predicted an account? This is about as glorious as it gets. I love this. And when they came the first time, they were doing a brute force against the Active Directory in O365. And for anybody of you that are not Microsoft people, the Microsoft guidance is 500 failed login attempts over 30 minutes. And you lock the account for 30 minutes and then automatically unlock it. And they did this after 5 on a Friday, California time. Nobody noticed. If we hadn't been paying attention to, boring things like account failures, right? Login failures, this totally would not have been noticed. A month, so it was 76,000 attempts that happened in a 45-minute time frame. They were coming through a shady VPC provider out of the Netherlands. Put some tactical blocks, it goes away. A month later, they came back and do it again. The attack time was less than 20 minutes. This time they had an OPSEC slip. We had 4 packets that came from a cell phone in Iran, which meant that now we had even further cemented this thing. The third time they came, they were coming up against Okta. So now they were trying to figure out which apps in Okta were 2-factor auth and that kind of stuff. The good news is Duo held. I gotta tell you, I'm a big fan of Duo. Now, it helps that I also have processes to know, can I trust all of the Duo tokens I've got, right? But Duo did its job. Now, interestingly, when we were doing the stuff off of here, for example, I found a surprising number of salespeople like the password of spring 2017. Guess what their password's going to be in the summer? The Iranians, however, didn't know. They had no idea because Duo worked. So they had guessed that password and they got past the first factor and then they failed at second factor. So we had an ability to go back and beat some people. Lower right-hand corner, buy your team a beer. I mean, this is what it looks like when they are just rocking it. One of the guys out of my East Coast office, he was just all over this thing. I went to one of the guys go to a butcher shop. We got him the biggest porterhouse steak we could, wrapped in the paper, and slapped it down on the counter. We're like, eat it raw, you're an animal. It was fantastic. But think about this for a second. Blocked phishing mails nobody looks at, and some account failures, some login failures. That was it. And if you didn't have normal, boring, stable little processes to find this stuff, it would have been, hey, I had phishing mails and I had some login failures that came from the internet. Having the Intel linkage back in to do this one, this is where it gets really, really, really awesome. I mean, truly amazing levels of awesome. And I would ask for more questions, but she's going to beat me up. Last major example slide. We put out these kill chain models all the time, and they're interesting to look at so you can understand what's going on. But in my org, you have to get into, okay, who does something with these? This is not just interesting bathroom reading, right? This is, what do you do with it? On the left side of it, it's generally a bunch of individual pieces of malware that would have their own autonomously critical events, okay? That little loop on the top is where it's horrible, because that's all the stuff that your engineers do, right? That's where you've got RDP and WMI calls, and that's where you've got PowerShell usage and all the rest of those things. That it's really difficult to end up getting something that says, hey, this piece of PowerShell is horrible and this piece of PowerShell is fine. When you get it, I'll give you several examples that are tactical and you can wrap your brain around them. We have one in one of our tools, Helix tools. I just had, coincidentally, about a month ago, I hired our internal red teaming people to try to come after my Active Directory. And there was a detection in there that I caught my own red teaming guys 9 times out of 12, which is amazing. These guys do red teaming at 3-letter agencies. The fact that I could get them 75% of the time was world-shatteringly awesome. And we would find them and say, yep, good job, keep going, right? So keep doing your text. There was one detection in there that was PowerShell where the payload is obfuscated behind hex. So a human can't read it. Maybe you have some engineer that thinks it's fun to convert things to hex. And if you did, how would you know? And if you did, tell them to stop doing that, and you have this perfect, true positive detection, right? The only people that are doing hex obfuscation are red teams and bad guys, right? There's a couple more examples on sort of these boring little processes that are, 30 minutes a week, an hour a week max. There's one on PSExec usage, which PSExec is one of the sysinternals tools. You probably have valid reasons to be using it, but how can you tell the difference between a valid usage and the Chinese, right? We had one where we caught one of my engineers using, the developer engineers, using PSExec to uninstall my endpoint product from his laptop. So we call him up, what the hell are you doing? And his motivations were good. He wanted to get rid of the corporately installed endpoint product to put the one he was developing on there. We're like, that's nice, quit it. Here's how you do this in lab terms. The reason why I put this up here, and we were talking in human factors earlier, in that case, he told his friends, one of them told his boss told the director calls me and says, you're not gonna fire my developer, are you? Think about how awesome that is. There's probably 20, 25 people now that they all know we're paying attention. They will have better passwords. They're much more likely to pay attention to phishing emails. That becomes its own sort of urban legends, and they're like, oh yeah, no, don't do anything stupid because they'll find you, right? In this case, I'm looking for the Russians, but there's a disproportionate value off of being the security group that actually finds this kind of stuff, right? One of the other ones on there, there's some detections in our endpoint product that looks at what the North Koreans are doing. So they have botnets that are doing crypto mining. So when they break into your grandmother's computer, they don't steal her banking password anymore. They just steal her CPU cycles, right? They can monetize that very directly. We had one guy, somebody in Asia, where the detection goes off and we go to work the incident, and the same tool that did the detection is also the incident response tool. So in less than 10 minutes, we were able to close the security incident because we found out it's not the North Koreans. We see him interactively going to the website, downloading the client, and launching it and running the thing. So we call him up and say, like, quit it. What the hell are you doing? Quit it. They're telling me to hurry up. His logic was fantastic, though. He comes back, he says, well, I'm using some CPU cycles and some electricity. How is that any different than surfing Facebook? That's great logic. Quit it. No, the North Koreans aren't surfing Facebook, right? He came back a second time. He's like, well, what if I only do it at home? And we're like, no, you still can't do this at home. And by the way, if you'd done this in the QA lab, we would have bought more servers, and then I would have fired you for theft of resources. But it did actually have a risk question. Your acceptable use policy probably doesn't say that you're not allowed to do crypto mining, right? Now, we had, right? I mean, like, welcome to the world we all live in, right? We did have things like you're not allowed to use company resources for personal gain, and and she's going to tell me to hurry up and stop talking, so I'll ignore the rest of that one. The purpose of this, though, is to be able to do this often. Seriously, this should be multiple times a day. You should be able to know that, like, when various companies' breach reports come out, you have somebody tasked with finding out what are the capabilities that come out of this. Now, when I do these things, and I do the CISO conferences, whenever I'm seeing people talk about capabilities and stuff, I'm taking notes on myself, on my own org, to say, do I already have that capability? And if not, build it, right? So my own guys hate it when I come to these things, because I'm sending emails going, hey, can we do this? Are we covered with that one, right? We do a cyber defense summit in November where it's our own people, saying the things that we know from. And the entire time, I should make sure that they're not saying anything up there that surprises me. It's kind of hard to get our own report cards on our own jobs, right? I actually did. I was listening to one of our Mandiant consultants was talking to a board of directors, and they were asking, like, how good is your CISO? Well, that's an uncomfortable question to be. I mean, like, you go like, all right, how would you measure it? Well, there's no actual scorecard for our job. There are indicators of what's going well, right? You never have perfect, but you can say it's going more good than bad, right? I'm going to stop. Thank you all very much.